Welcome to another episode of The Dog's Voice, the podcast where we talk about puppies, their health, and all things dog related. I'm your host, Ben the Vet. This podcast is brought to you by the Dog Breeding Reform Group, where we're working to improve the health and welfare of dogs and support responsible breeding and informed dog care. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Lauren Bennett. Lauren is a scientific and policy officer for the RSPCA and has a background in teaching and veterinary nursing. We're going to be talking lots in this episode about animal welfare, a bit about the illegal puppy trade and what kinds of issues the RSPCA is dealing with when it comes to dog breeding. And hopefully we'll be able to equip you with some practical tools to avoid buying a puppy from a puppy farm or with health problems, maximise welfare if you're thinking of getting a puppy. Lauren, thanks so much for joining us. Can you start by maybe just introducing yourself a bit more and telling us about what you do at the RSPCA?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's great to be here. So I work within the Companion Animals Department of the RSPCA, and essentially we use data and scientific research to influence and positively change behaviour and policy, and that can be both government and corporate policy as well. And our main focus is on companion animals, but we do also cover animals who are used in sport, so that could be horse racing and dogs who are working as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to talk about all that, because I think when people think about the RSPCA, they maybe think about the sort of enforcement and the welfare cases and inspections sort of going on, but there's so much more, isn't there, to what the RSPCA does?
Yeah, absolutely. We're just one tiny department in a very big machine, but there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, particularly with advocacy and influencing work, and of course education as well, and just trying to really improve the lives of animals in all aspects of the world.
So that's it, isn't it? All these animal welfare problems, they stem much of the time, don't they, from problems with human behaviour. And suppose, like you say, that influencing work and advocacy and education, that's what I try to do, and just try and get as much information to people as possible to try and, like you say, sort of change behaviours. I mean, we're talking, human behaviour is very much the core of some of the issues that we see with the irresponsible end of the dog breeding industry. Obviously, there are loads of responsible breeders, and we're going to talk a lot about how anyone who is thinking of getting a puppy can find a good breeder. What are the hallmarks of a good breeder? But let's start with the kind of other end of the spectrum. When we're talking about irresponsible dog breeding, what does that mean? What is irresponsible dog breeding?
So essentially, I guess the way that we define it is that it's irresponsible if it is done in a way which doesn't prioritise health and behaviour. So often aesthetics, the way the dog will look, will be prioritised. And coinciding with this, often money and profit are also prioritised. But also it can mean that they contribute to the overpopulation of dogs. So like many other animal welfare charities, we are in a capacity crisis. We have more dogs in our care than ever before. And a lot of this is down to sort of the dogs that are being bred at the minute and the vast scale of which they are being bred. And because irresponsible breeders don't prioritise health and temperament and behaviour, often what happens is they're breeding puppies who have lifelong painful conditions, and often these can be life-limiting as well, so they do shorten their lifespan. But particularly those who end up acquiring these puppies are often completely unaware of these issues. And it also can mean that they are unprepared, both emotionally and financially. And then this contributes to the increased risk of abandonment and relinquishment as well. So it is a bit of a vicious cycle when it comes to irresponsible breeding, and it does impact absolutely all parts of society, not just the dogs themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking obviously a lot, and we'll be talking about puppy purchasing and purchasing habits, but it's important to also direct people to be thinking about rescue and rehoming first. And, it's not the right thing for everybody, but like you say, the rescue centres really are overflowing with animals that need homes. So people need to be thinking about rescue first. But what we're going to be talking about is really that situation with rescue and rehoming is fed into by the problems with breeding, aren't they? That people often completely unwittingly are getting dogs from lower welfare sources, dogs that are more likely to have health problems, behaviour problems that are more likely to be rehomed. And also it may be that actually they're doing most things right, but they're just choosing to get a type of dog that, because of its genetics or body shape, is more likely to end up with health problems and behaviour problems that then end up with them being rehomed. So it's all very much interlinked, isn't it?
It is, and it's not an easy issue to tackle. And and sort of finding out where the problem arises and where it starts and where we should work on the most to contribute and help reduce this is really quite a complex issue. But I think being informed and being aware is a really important thing, really just to empower those people who are purchasing puppies and make them feel confident in their decision making.
And so when we're talking about those lower welfare sources, the extreme end of the spectrum, puppy farming is something that we're going to talk about. What actually is a puppy farm? Is there a definition of what a puppy farm is? And is a puppy farm always bad?
Well, what is a puppy farm? There's lots of varying definitions as to what a puppy farm is, but here at the RSPCA, we tend to use that to describe the intensive commercial breeding of dogs. And typically, this is the breeding which prioritises money over health, behaviour and welfare. So most of the time, it's a very high volume of puppies being produced, and also they are being reared and housed in very low standards, typically often not meeting the legal standards that they are required to do. And they essentially do this because they want to produce as many puppies as possible in as short a space of time as possible to meet that existing demand that is there. And operating at a higher welfare standard not only costs more money, but also it takes a significantly much more amount of time. So there's a lot more thought that goes into responsible breeding. So often puppy farms are operating illegally without a local authority licence, and they tend to get away with doing this because they operate using lots of different aliases. So they'll tend to use different names, they'll tend to have different phone numbers and use burner phones which can't be traceable. And also they'll use a variety of email addresses. And this is all so they can simply avoid detection. But they are very clever with doing this, particularly when advertising puppies for sale. So it isn't always easy to spot. And often what happens when it comes to people who then want to buy those puppies, they will move mum and the puppies, usually to some separate accommodation, which is staged. So it looks like it's a wonderful family home and that's the only litter available. But this is all a bit of a guise and a ruse to essentially dupe you into thinking that you've got this really well-bred puppy who's had wonderful early life experiences. So this is how purchasers are often unaware of the true conditions that they're raised in, because it's very hidden from the public, understandably, because they don't want to be caught and they want to keep on doing what they're doing.
There's a lot of money to be made from it. When you said burner phone, it made me think of Line of Duty, these organised crime gangs. But there are organised crime gangs that are breeding dogs, aren't there? There's a huge amount of money to be made.
Yeah, and this is something that we're seeing quite a lot more of at the RSPCA is the links to organised crime with dog breeding. And it's almost as if the dog breeding serves as a front to sort of justify some of those big incomes. A lot of it is cash and therefore it's not always traceable. But often behind the scenes, there's other highly organised criminality going on in the background as well.
Yeah, you do see, particularly a few years ago when French bulldogs maybe not quite as popular as they were a couple of years ago, but you'd see Instagram pages, people selling French bulldogs in rare colours and say this dog is worth £100,000. And you think that potentially money laundering going on. Say it's just easy to integrate dog breeding with other criminal activities.
Yeah.
I suppose with puppy farming, is puppy farming always bad? And I suppose essentially it is extremely hard, isn't it, to protect the welfare of animals in a breeding kind of situation where you are breeding for profit intensively. I think it's very, very, very hard to meet the needs of the animals in those kind of situations.
Yeah, I mean, there are sort of larger breeders who may operate to a higher standard, but I guess the key difference is they will do their best to meet the legal requirements that are required. They will likely be operating with a local authority licence. So it doesn't mean that all large-scale dog breeders are bad, but often it is something that we are quite concerned about. And again, sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are low output breeders who, again, for whatever reasons, might not meet the licensing threshold. And these can also be low welfare breeders as well. So it isn't really a one size fits all, and there's risk with every sort of situation that you come across.
And I guess that's the problem, both with the kind of enforcement and the legal side of things, but also means it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it, for anyone looking to get a puppy to spot the kind of hallmarks of where there are welfare issues. In 2020, so it's been 6 years now, isn't it? Lucy's Law came in and that was all over the media quite a lot. Some people listening might have heard about Lucy's Law. Can you maybe explain what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lucy's Law came in, as you say, in 2020, and this was introduced under the Licensing of Activities Involving Animals regulation. And that regulation covers all aspects of dog breeding and to some extent welfare as well. And essentially, Lucy's Law bans the third-party sale of puppies and kittens under 6 months old unless they are bought directly from a breeder or from a rescue centre. So this essentially was brought in to stop puppy farms and other types of breeders from being able to use dealers to sell those puppies. And it just increases that transparency a little bit as well.
And I guess it means that probably around that time we weren't really seeing puppies and kittens in pet shops. Were they banned already, or did Lucy's Law sort of ban puppies and kittens being sold in pet shops? I feel like I never really saw pet shops selling pets when I was younger.
Do you know, that's a really good question. And I think that's always been something which isn't, I guess when we think of a pet shop, we think of those which house multiple species, and that isn't necessarily possible. But you do still have commercial breeders who do operate in a pet shop style of way. So again, I guess it comes down to their facilities and the type of breeding that they are operating. But I don't, off the top of my head, I don't recall specifically if it does mention pet shops in there, to be honest.
No, potentially a bit of a grey area. I mean, one kind of safeguard, there is legislation, isn't there, that with microchipping, so breeders technically should all be registering microchips first for puppies, shouldn't they, to themselves, not directly to the new owner.
Yeah.
That's another safeguard, isn't it?
So it is completely separate. The microchipping legislation isn't related to Lucy's Law, and they were brought in at different times. But again, it's another aspect of that traceability. And like you say, the breeder must be, so legally stated as the first named owner on the microchip details. And the idea is to improve that traceability. So it's very clear that the person who is named as the first registered was the breeder. I think, again, there are also difficulties with this, as there are with many laws, that whether this is happening and whether it has improved traceability as much of what we liked, that isn't necessarily the case. So there are still issues with that, but at least it is a measure that is there to try and help with this issue.
So, when we're talking about Lucy's Law, I think certainly at one point I thought that it meant that puppy farms were no longer legal, but that's not actually what Lucy's Law is it?
No, it's not. And it is quite simply, they are essentially cutting out the middleman. And Lucy's Law was introduced to try and ensure that puppies are bred and sold by the breeder. And in a lot of respect, puppy farms are already covered in legislation and they are operating illegally. So for them to operate illegally, what they would have to do is register with their local authority if they are producing 3 or more litters in a 12-month period, or if they breed for profit, regardless of the numbers of litters that they have produced. So it's the separate licensing of activities involving animals regulations, which covers the scale of what they are breeding, whereas Lucy's Law simply dictates who can sell those puppies and who can't.
So, really there are safeguards, there are legal safeguards in place that mean any sort of facility that would be considered a puppy farm, there's some level of standards that they have to meet, isn't there?
Yeah, there are. So again, with licensed breeders, they will be required to have inspections to ensure that they're meeting the guidance for both health and welfare and also the husbandry, so how they are being cared for. So this can to some extent offer some assurance for purchasers that they know they have met this standard. But sadly, there are issues with the local authority licensing scheme, and it does still mean that they can be high output and low welfare breeders out there. And generally this is because that oversight and enforcement of the licensing regime isn't always adequate. So people can still operate to a low standard and appear to be legitimately licensed because they are, but it might just not be that they are operating to the standard that is required.
When we're talking about puppy farms, does the RSPCA have figures to show like how many puppy farms are still in operation?
We do have these figures. So in 2025, we received 390 reported incidents of puppy farming, and this was across England and Wales. And that was actually increased by 22% when we compare that to 2024. So it is still a significant issue that is going on, and that is something that we are trying to end and raise awareness of as well.
So yeah, certainly this idea of puppy farms are becoming less common. It doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. I know there's also a growing problem, particularly maybe since Lucy's Law has kind of changed the way that these puppy dealers are operating. We're seeing a growing problem with puppies that are being illegally imported from abroad into this country, aren't we? Puppy smuggling, as it's known. How big a problem is that?
So Lucy's Law absolutely had the best intentions, but something that quickly became apparent is that there was an unintended consequence, and there was a bit of a loophole which meant that importers could still bring in puppies from other countries into England and Wales. Essentially, where people were unable to use dealers in the UK, they were still able to use dealers outside of the UK and bring those puppies in. And what we found particularly was that COVID, understandably, was a contributing factor. There was an absolutely ginormous supply for puppies within that time period, and the volume of UK breeders just couldn't meet that demand. We actually saw from data that imports peaked during this time, particularly in 2021, where the highest number of puppies brought in was around 70,000. Yeah, astronomical.
It's a huge number, isn't it? And I certainly wouldn't, during COVID, now I probably see one, maybe a couple of new puppies each week for a puppy check and a vaccination. During COVID, we were seeing sometimes like 5 in a day. And I remember thinking, where are all these puppies coming from? This huge surge, you've got to have female dogs only come into season twice a year, don't they? So you've got to have female dogs there sort of ready to be giving birth to meet this demand. And from what you're saying, it sounds like a lot of that demand is being met by importing the puppies.
Yeah, absolutely. It was. And we were all at home. We were all desperate to get outside and do some exercise. And many people thought getting a dog was the perfect answer to that. And it perhaps was for those individuals, but it just meant that the demand had so significantly increased, we couldn't meet it. And again, from our data, 51% of imports in 2021 actually came from Romania. So they were one of the biggest importers of puppies in the UK. And we know that the legal standard for dog keeping and dog breeding it falls well below the standard that we would have in the UK. And I guess combined with this, not only are they being bred in a low welfare environment, which isn't good at all, but because there was that such significant demand, the puppies were being taken away from their mums far too early, which has big consequences on health and behaviour. They were being transported for really long distances below the minimum age that they should have. And the puppy dealers and importers were getting away with this because they were forging the required document. They hadn't always been vaccinated and they weren't the age they said they were. And they were just forging these documents to bring them into the country to meet our ever increasing demand. And sadly, this is something that we see all too often. We have a special operations unit who do our sort of major crime investigations. And they found, again, similar to puppy farming, they found lots of undercover criminal gangs operating in very sophisticated schemes, which are being used to pass off imported puppies, saying that they're bred in the UK in this wonderful home environment. And that is just not the case.
A lot of smoke and mirrors, isn't there? And I think a lot of people, well, obviously thousands of people have unwittingly bought these puppies. And have no idea that they come from abroad. I've heard stories of some of these vehicles have been stopped and, they're just crammed with puppies. They've traveled huge distances across Europe. The dogs have, in some cases, seemingly not had the opportunity to get out of the van. I've heard stories about puppies being smuggled underneath in the base of boot, hidden so they can't be detected. A lot of these puppies are transported in horrible conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of this has a significant lasting impact on the individuals and, of course, the people who've unwittingly bought a puppy from these people.
And there's also concerns about importing infections, diseases that we don't have in this country. And I think one thing that I've heard talked about quite a lot in veterinary circles is how it's a miracle, really, that we've not had cases of rabies in this country, because the UK is free of rabies, but it is present in small, low numbers of cases in some parts of Europe and Asia, obviously. And so that's the worry, isn't it? There's a ticking time bomb to see our first rabies case.
Yeah, and it is a scary thought, and it is a possibility, and unless we sort of really crack down on this. And another infection control that we're concerned about is brucella, which again the UK was free of. And brucella is essentially a bacteria which causes infections in dogs. This can be really quite difficult to spot because often it doesn't have clinical signs. And the risk is also that it can be passed on to humans as well. So while we were free of this, we actually had the first detected case in the UK. It was 2002, and this has continued to rise. But with the new sort of legislation to try and tackle some of this importation problem, we are now seeing that brucella testing is required before entering Britain, particularly from Romania, to help try and reduce this risk.
It's a really heartbreaking infection to deal with. I've seen several cases of it, cases where it's been found incidentally, and also cases where animals have been unwell with brucella. And because of the risk of zoonotic infection, these can be cases where euthanasia is discussed because of that risk of infection. Case dependent, depends on quite a lot of factors and assessing the kind of risk of the home environment and everything. But yeah, there's all of these things to consider. And so I guess these are all reasons why people really need to do their homework and do their utmost to avoid getting a puppy from these sources, because there are so many potential pitfalls can come about. There is a new law is coming in that puppies from Romania specifically, or any dog generally, includes dogs coming through sort of rescue charities, have to be tested for brucella, don't they, before entering Britain?
Yeah, so Romania is explicitly stated they do need brucella testing. And the new legislation is essentially the Import of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Bill. So this came into force at the end of 2025. And this means that dogs, cats and ferrets under the age of 6 months of age can't be brought into the country at all. There are some other elements to that as well. So it does also ban the import of animals with mutilations. So this includes cropped ears, where they've had their ears surgically altered, docked tails, and having their claws removed as well. And again, the introduction of this will hopefully crack down on this problem of puppy smuggling. It will hopefully increase biosecurity, but it also means that we can see that if any dogs do have mutilations after this point, they have either been imported illegally into the UK, or they have had the procedures conducted illegally in the UK, because there are also banned procedures as well, aside from dock tails, which can be conducted in a minority of circumstances.
I think that new legislation that's come in is really aiming to close all these loopholes, isn't it? And that's what people could easily make the excuse if they had a dog whose ears had been cropped illegally. Oh, they were born in abroad somewhere where ear cropping is legal, but they won't be able to use that excuse anymore. And I guess with the puppy imports, the thing is that previously puppies would have to be a minimum of 15 weeks to be imported, but it would be quite easy, really. Puppies don't have birth certificates, so often we would be, someone would come and bring a puppy in and say, oh, this puppy is 15 weeks, but they may actually be maybe 11, 12 weeks. Well, it can be a little bit hard to say with certainty, no, this puppy is not 15 weeks old, like you claim it is, but actually they can't claim that a 12-week-old puppy is 6 months old, can they? Because it's just not, you can't get away with that.
Yeah, it does. Hopefully it'll make that sort of a bit more distinguishable and sort of add that extra layer of protection for the dogs and also for the people who are purchasing them as well.
That's the hope. So I think we're going to talk a bit more about how people can try and spot a puppy where puppy's coming from a low welfare source. And there is this phrase pet fishing, isn't there, which has been used in quite a few campaigns, which has come from the term catfishing. Basically, it means someone being duped into believing a puppy or a kitten comes from a high welfare, reputable source, a home environment, a loving home, when actually they're just being tricked and they've been bred in a puppy farm or been illegally smuggled in a van across Europe. How can people spot some of the kind of the techniques that breeders are using to try and trick them? How can they maximize their chance of getting a healthy puppy? And I suppose also talking about that, how is it firstly actually that breeders are managing to trick people? What kind of techniques are they using?
So it is incredibly difficult to spot, and sellers have become really well versed in this and are getting almost better at fooling people into believing that their puppy is coming from a really high welfare environment. But things we've seen them use stooge mums. So that's putting the puppies with another dog who isn't the mother, who hasn't given birth to them. And often this is if they've been removed from their mum too early, which is a very big red flag, as it were, for us. We always say, make sure you see mum and puppy together. And if they know they've taken the puppies away from the mum before the legal age they can, they'll go and use any other dog to make it appear that that is their mum. We have seen people hiring out homes, so short-term rentals or whatever it may be, to make it appear like that is the environment where the puppy has been bred. But actually all they've done is taken the dogs from the low welfare environment and temporarily put them in this nicer environment to make you feel more reassured that this is the environment that they have been reared in and this is everything as it's meant to be. But that sadly isn't the case. Something as well which we're seeing more of and is a very new development is that we're seeing an increased use of artificial intelligence for pet advertising photos. So rather than previously where they would have had to have moved these dogs and organise a nice home environment and almost set this up a little bit, what they're doing now is keeping them in the environment where they are, but just using AI to change the background or make it appear as if the puppies are more healthy or look a certain way. So it's getting even harder to spot. And yeah, don't envy anybody who's looking for a puppy at this time. It's incredibly difficult.
It's scary, isn't it? AI we're seeing we're seeing videos everywhere all over social media of people giving just fake medical advice, and there are a lot of pitfalls, aren't there, to AI. I think that's it, that people are really up against quite sophisticated systems that are in place to try and trick them. I guess people really got bits of practical advice, but people need to trust their intuition, don't they, and their instinct. If it just doesn't feel right, don't be afraid to step away. But I think sometimes, certainly what I see in practice is that people say, oh, well, it didn't look like it was a very nice environment. The puppies all seemed a bit nervous. I wasn't getting a good feeling, but I didn't want to leave them there. Sometimes people feel like the best thing that they can do is to rescue the puppy from this awful situation that they're in. But that's not a great thing to do, is it really? In terms of the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's not. And, it's a really difficult thing to be facing as an individual in that circumstance. And absolutely, you may feel like you're doing the best thing for that individual by taking them and still buying them, because you obviously don't want to see an animal in that situation. But often what we're doing here is purchasing based on emotion. And that's what unscrupulous breeders are hoping for. They want you to purchase based on emotion and not really thinking properly. But this actually just funds the breeding. So you're not only giving them money to continue, but you're also providing a space for another puppy to be bred. So if there is the demand there and people continue to buy these poorly puppies from these low welfare environments, there's almost no incentive for these people to improve their standards and do things properly and legally, because people are just buying them anyway. So it is difficult to accept and understand, but our advice is absolutely always always walk away. Don't fund the issue and report any concerns that you have as soon as possible.
I think that's it, that walking away is actually probably the most powerful thing you can do as a consumer. It's consumer behavior. It's an industry that has developed because there is a market, there is money to be made. And so you walking away means that they have to change. The industry has to change. Welfare standards have to improve if they want to, continue producing puppies. And that's what we want, is improved welfare. If people have had an interaction with a breeder, gone to see a puppy and they have concerns, who should they actually go to report concern?
So there's quite a few people who people should be contacting. So breeding licensing is under the control of the local authority. So whether they are or aren't operating without a license, then absolutely contact the local authority. You can also contact trading standards as well. So I know we all know puppies are sentient beings and they are individuals, but they are still classed as property. So you do still have some protections as you would if you were buying a new sofa, for example. And of course, if you've got really serious welfare concerns, then animal welfare is a police matter, so you can contact the police. And of course, you can contact us at the RSPCA. You can either phone us or report it online. We are and actively do investigate puppy farms and low welfare breeders.
So if people that want to, think, I want to get a dog, I would like a puppy, I would ideally like to rescue that puppy. Obviously, we've kind of established that, rescuing a puppy directly from a breeder is not the thing to do. What is it that a rescue centre or organisation will do differently that mean that they're having a positive welfare impact getting that puppy? What are the kind of safeguards, I guess, in place?
So when you genuinely rescue from a reputable organisation, you first of all aren't funding poor welfare breeding, which is one positive. And of course, it's incredibly rewarding to give an animal a second chance. And with a lot of animal welfare charities, what happens, the animals obviously coming into our care, we invest a significant time into the rehabilitation of the animals. They don't all have health and behaviour issues, which I think is a significant misconception that people have. But of course, they're going to need some level of support to get them out into a new home and help them adjust and adapt to that. So to help them do this, all of our animals have been checked over by a vet, and any treatment will have either be continuing or will have finished to some extent. And we also behaviourally assess them as well. So we put them through a variety of scenarios to check how they're going to manage in certain situations. And that means that when we are rehoming them, we know the ideal environment for them. We do put a lot of time and a lot of work into this, and that can be why it can take quite a while to find a rescue dog who meets your needs, because we don't do it based on appearance. We tend to do it based on suitability to your lifestyle. So our process is called the perfect match. We will ask you lots of questions based on your lifestyle, and then we'll go and look through all the doggies who are in our care and see which ones are suitable to be living in your environment and the things that you've asked for. And this is essentially to ensure success. We need it to be right. We want it to be right for you. And of course, we don't want those animals to come back into our care. And I think the other important factor to consider when rescuing from a true rescue organisation is that you also have, to some extent, ongoing support as well. It can be difficult for dogs to either come from a kennel environment or changing from a different home to another one. There's lots of adaptations required from both yourself and the dog, so we can support you in some of that transition period as well.
I think that's one of the things, or extrapolating to breeding as well, from everything that rescue does, because obviously these are animals that have been in a home, have been in a scenario, and it's not worked out for whatever reason. And so what rescue really does, and charities like the RSPCA, they really do everything they can and invest a lot of resources to maximize the chance of success, don't they? They don't want the animal to be rehomed again. They want to make sure that they are compatible with the home that they're going into. And I think that's something that's also a marker of a good breeder, isn't it? That someone who's breeding puppies with welfare in mind, with the animal's well-being being a priority, they really want to make sure that the puppies they're breeding are going to good homes and are going to stay there and not be rehomed, and end up to be well-adjusted, emotionally happy dogs when they become adults. And I think it's really important to bear all that in mind. I think there's a sort of, maybe in some instances, or probably in a lot of instances, where people are getting puppies from these lower welfare sources, maybe they have some kind of awareness that maybe I haven't done exactly the right thing, and I haven't ticked all the boxes and done all the checks to make sure that this is a good breeder. But it's a sort of a little bit of an out of sight, out of mind thing, isn't it? But people really are setting them and their dog up for failure, aren't they? Or certainly a much higher risk of failure if they're getting a puppy from one of those low welfare sources, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's incredibly difficult to understand what is or what makes a good breeder. But essentially, I think in terms of a good breeder, it would be a low output, high welfare environment. Whether they have a local authority license or not will depend on whether they meet the licensing threshold. But it also will take a significant amount of time to be able to get a puppy from them, because they will invest, again, a lot of time and thought into the breeding of that dog. Are they healthy? They'll do all of the screening tests. And also they will vet you as much as what a rescue centre does. They will want to know about your suitability and your lifestyle and whether you are the right match for their puppy. And that can be difficult, whereas some of these lower welfare breeders don't put as much effort into the thought behind the behaviour and the health. They're simply thinking about money in a lot of circumstances. And this can mean that puppies bought from puppy farms and low welfare breeders do have health and behavioural issues. They haven't had the screening tests conducted. They perhaps haven't had that early socialisation plan, which is vital. And this again can have a huge toll on you as a purchaser, because a lot of these problems will be completely unexpected. Nobody wants to go out and buy an unhealthy puppy and face a lifetime of veterinary bills, or potentially only have them for a very short period of time because they're very poorly. So it does impact more than just the individual dog themselves. It also has a significant impact on you and your family and everybody else who cares for that dog.
Yeah, I think I see firsthand in practice the toll that it can have on people when, an animal is very, very unwell or develops, I suppose we talk about physical health, but also emotional health of these dogs. And we see a lot of behavioural problems, and we know that behavioural problems are more likely in a dog that has not been well socialised, that has been brought up in a poor environment, and because the first few months of dog's development are really critical for their emotional development. It also has an impact on their long-term health, and there's this study recently conducted by the Royal Veterinary College, and they found that puppies purchased illegally under 6 weeks of age, and so under the 8 weeks is the legal minimum, typically suffered almost 3 additional health problems by the time they were 21 months of age, compared to puppies that were sold at an older age. So we're getting data now that really does kind of put it into more concrete terms that a puppy farm puppy is likely to be a less healthy dog. One of the aims of this podcast is to try and equip people with more knowledge. So if they're thinking of getting a puppy soon, or they might do at some point in the future, they can maximize their chances of getting a happy, healthy puppy that's going to be a good companion that they can love and enjoy spending time with. What tips do you have for people to help distinguish between a reputable breeder and an irresponsible one?
So always see the puppy in the place where they have been bred, and that needs to be with mum and siblings as well. So I appreciate we've spoken about how often this can be a bit of a stooge and a bit of a front to con people. So try and visit more than once and make sure it is the same place that you are visiting. And if you're particularly clued up on dog behaviour, watch the interaction between the puppies and the mum. Often if the mum has given birth to them, they will have a much closer bond. They will be interacting with each other, potentially maybe nursing, if given the age of the puppies when you go and view them. If you find that the female dog who has supposedly given birth is quite distant, isn't really interacting, that can be a bit of a warning sign as well. Never organise to meet them somewhere else, even if they say it's convenience or halfway, and they're almost trying to make it seem like they're doing you a favour. This is a real red flag, so always see them where they've been bred. And don't be pressured. A lot of unscrupulous breeders use a lot of pressure tactics. So this could be guilt tripping you into it's the last one, they're going to be really lonely, and you need to purchase this dog now. And again, don't be pressured into be paying non-refundable deposits. So this is something, again, which we seem to be seeing more you shouldn't be being charged to go and view a puppy, and particularly, especially not a non-refundable deposit, because this is essentially designed to discourage you from walking away and not taking the puppy. You've already paid a significant sum just to go and view them. You're therefore more inclined to take them, even if you know it isn't the right thing to do. And I think more generally speaking, you can use the puppy contract. So this, again, good breeders may have their own. They may use the one that the RSPCA helped develop. This has loads of questions that you can ask, and also that they will ask you as well. So be prepared to be vetted yourself, be prepared to be honest, and make sure that when you are choosing a puppy, choose one who is suitable to your lifestyle, suitable for your financial availability, and also choose them for their health and temperament. We see a lot of people choosing dogs based on their appearance because they're popular or because they really like the look of them. But actually, this doesn't often set you up for success because the chances are they may not be suitable for your lifestyle. And we know that where there are incredibly popular breeds, this is where some of that high demand contributes to some of that low welfare breeding, because, like I say, those unscrupulous breeders who only care about profit are really trying to quickly meet that demand. And the only way they can do that is by lowering the welfare standard. So really try and do a perfect match like we would do. Really think about your lifestyle and what is it that you want from having a dog in your home, and then go and select a dog based off that. But again, most importantly, if it doesn't feel right, just walk away. Don't continue to fund this practice. None of us want this happening in the world. But if we do continue to fund it and contribute towards it, it's never going to end, sadly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the puppy contract particularly, I think, is a fantastic resource, and it very much there's a lot to think about, and it really details all the kind of questions and things, talking points, things you need to think about, have at the forefront of your mind when you're looking for a breeder. You said, be prepared to walk away. It's not a process to rush. Getting a dog, you're going to be finding a companion that's going to be in your life for a very long time, that you're going to be very emotionally invested in, and that really you want your dog to be as happy and healthy as possible. And the decisions you make when you are getting a dog, whether you're rescuing them or buying a puppy, they will have a lifelong impact on kind of relationship and your dog's happiness. So I think that's key, isn't it? We live in this consumer society where everything's available at the click of a button. And as I think I've said on another podcast episode with Kat the vet, if I wanted a puppy, I could probably have one delivered to me tomorrow. But that is not a good thing. And so, just take a deep breath. Don't rush the process is important.
Absolutely. Most definitely.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us on The Dog's Voice. I think there's so much to think about there. So many pitfalls and tricks that these puppy dealers and importers are employing to try and trick people. So I think it's important that people really do their homework. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to us on your podcast platform. Share it with others who care about dogs. You can learn more about our work at the Dog Breeding Reform Group and follow us on social media. We're on Instagram for more tips on finding a healthy puppy and for future episodes of the podcast. Until next time, thanks very much for listening and for helping to give dogs a voice.